She didn't want to be found. He didn't expect to care. But somewhere between the silence of the hills and the kindness of a stranger, a runaway girl and a lonely man began building something neither of them had dared to imagine. A life where no one had to chase, and no one had to hide. Stay with us until the end, because the quietest moments in this story speak the loudest. And if you believe there's still room in this world for decency, hit that like button and subscribe now. The hills were quiet that morning, too quiet for late spring. Birds had stopped singing, and even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. Tala, barely 16, ran barefoot over sharp stones and dry brush, her breath coming in short gasps. Her long black hair clung to her back, wet with sweat and fear. She didn't look back, not anymore. The men had horses and rifles. She had nothing but her will to disappear. She'd been chased off the land her grandmother called sacred. The new fences, the loud trucks, the strangers yelling in English she barely understood, they all came suddenly, like a storm swallowing everything. Tala didn't ask permission to escape. She just ran. Into the hills. Into the silence. Into a place where maybe no one would follow. She reached a rocky outcrop and collapsed behind it, heart pounding like a war drum. Her foot was bleeding. Her throat burned. But she didn't cry. Her grandmother had told her once, when you cry in front of a stranger, they take a piece of you. So she stayed still, like a deer hiding in tall grass. Far below, she could see a ranch, quiet, fenced, with a single house and a red barn. No trucks. No men shouting. Just a dog barking somewhere far off. Tala knew she couldn't survive much longer alone. But she wasn't ready to trust anyone again. Not yet. That night, she curled under a low mesquite tree, wrapping her arms around her knees. She whispered in Apache to the moon. Words for strength. For her ancestors. For her grandmother, whose hands once braided her hair by firelight. The stars above didn't answer, but they also didn't judge. The cold bit into her skin as the hours passed. She could smell smoke from the ranch's chimney. Her stomach growled, loud and angry. She hadn't eaten since the day before. Still, Tala told herself, one more night. Just one more. Then I'll decide. But she didn't sleep. She watched. Waited. In the quiet, in the dark, she became part of the land again, silent, unseen, and hoping that someone, someday, would look at her without fear or claim. Jacob lived alone on that land for almost 12 years. Since his wife passed, the ranch had gone quiet, not just in sound, but in spirit. No kids. No neighbors. Just cattle, wind, and memory. He liked it that way. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Each morning, he woke before the sun and made coffee strong enough to bite back. He'd sit on the porch with his dog, Buck, watching the horizon shift from black to orange. The hills were beautiful but harsh. You had to listen to them. He'd learned that the hard way. That land didn't belong to anyone. You just lived on it until it decided to let you stay. That morning, though, something felt off. Buck kept sniffing the air near the edge of the fence. The dog paced more than usual, ears perked toward the hills. Jacob followed his gaze. Nothing but rocks and brush. Still, years of working that land had taught him to trust signs, even quiet ones. Especially quiet ones. Later, while stacking hay in the barn, Jacob noticed something strange, a dent in the dust near the back of the shed, like someone had laid there. Too small for Buck, too defined to be an animal. He paused, knelt down, touched the earth. Still warm. That night, after supper, he walked out to the same spot and left something by the fence, a wool blanket from the back of his truck. Old, but clean. He didn't say a word. Just laid it over the post and walked away. The next morning, the blanket was gone. He didn't panic. He didn't set traps or call the sheriff. Instead, he poured an extra cup of coffee and placed it on the porch railing. He didn't expect anyone to take it. But maybe, someone was watching. "Whatever's out there," he muttered to Buck, "they're cold. And careful. That's not trouble. That's fear." He went about his chores like usual, but his eyes drifted more often toward the hills. He couldn't explain it yet. But deep in his chest, a quiet pull had begun to form, like the land itself was shifting again, just enough to let someone else in. The wind was colder that morning, rolling down from the hills like it had something to say. Jacob stepped out onto the porch with 2 mugs of coffee, just like before. One for him, one left on the railing. He didn't see anyone. He didn't expect to. But the mug from yesterday had been moved. Not far, just a few inches off center. Someone had touched it. That was enough. He went about feeding the horses, checking the fences, and fixing the latch on the old chicken coop. But his mind wasn't on his work. It was back in the hills. Somewhere out there, someone was watching just as carefully as he was. That night, he did something different. He walked to the edge of his property with a small loaf of bread, wrapped in cloth, and placed it where the blanket had once been. He didn't linger. No flashlight. No noise. Just bread, sat down quietly, and the slow crunch of his boots walking away. Tala watched from behind a cluster of rocks, knees pulled to her chest. Her stomach twisted. The smell of food was warm and real, not imagined. She waited until the stars were high, then crawled down silently. She sniffed the cloth, peeled it open, and touched the bread like it might vanish. She didn't eat all of it. Just half. She left the rest neatly folded, cloth tucked back over it. She didn't want to seem greedy. The next morning, Jacob returned to the spot. The bread was half gone. He nodded once, like they had made a quiet agreement. He added something new, a small tin cup filled with water, placed gently next to the cloth. Then, for the first time, he spoke out loud. "Don't have to run," he said, voice low. "You can stay close if you want." He didn't wait for an answer. That evening, as he sat by the fire inside, Buck lifted his head and looked toward the window. Jacob turned just in time to catch a shape, small, fast, slipping back into the dark. She was getting closer. He didn't chase. He didn't question. He just left the door unlocked that night and hung another blanket near the fence. Not to trap her. Just in case she needed it. He knew fear well. But he also knew kindness, when it showed up quiet and steady. Sometimes, Jacob thought, you don't need to say much. You just need to leave the right things behind. The sunrise crept slowly over the hills, casting soft gold on the dry earth. Jacob was already outside, feeding the animals and listening to the wind shift through the brush. The tin cup was gone. So was the second blanket. He didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened. She was still out there. Watching. Choosing to stay close. That afternoon, he sat on a log near the edge of his land, hands resting on his knees, hat shading his face. He didn't bring food. He didn't leave anything behind. He just sat quietly, like he had nowhere better to be. Like the land itself was enough company. Behind a line of boulders, Tala watched. Her eyes flicked from his boots to his weathered hands, to the way he didn't fidget or shout. He was just still. That kind of stillness unsettled her at first. Then it began to feel safe. Jacob spoke, not loudly, not sharply, just enough to carry in the wind. "I don't need to know your story," he said. "You don't owe me anything." Tala didn't move. She barely breathed. "You hungry again? I'll leave more bread tomorrow. Boots, too, if you want 'em. You look cold." She stared down at her feet. Bruised. Dirty. Her toes ached. The cold at night had started to bite harder. But still, she stayed hidden. He stood, dusted off his jeans, and turned to go. After a few steps, he paused. Without turning around, he added, "I don't carry a rope. Never needed one to make someone stay." Tala's fingers tightened around the edge of the rock. That night, for the first time, she crept close enough to see the inside of the ranch house. Through the window, a single lamp glowed. She saw a table with one chair, a wall of books, an empty coat rack, and the man, sitting by the fire, reading a newspaper he never seemed to finish. She sat beneath the window, knees hugged to her chest, listening to the low crackle of the fire. She didn't understand every word he'd said, but she understood tone, and his had none of the sharp edges she feared. When the fire went out, she rose and disappeared into the night again. But something had changed. He didn't chase her. He didn't try to name her. He just left space. And for the first time in a long while, Tala felt like maybe, just maybe, that space could belong to her too. The mornings grew colder, and Tala's steps became slower. Her feet, still raw from weeks of walking barefoot, throbbed with every move. But each day she came closer to the edge of the ranch, though never far enough to be seen in daylight. Jacob kept his routine. He left bread, thick with butter, wrapped in cloth. A second tin cup, always filled. And now, beside them, a pair of worn leather boots, small, clearly old, but strong and well cared for. He didn't leave a note. He never did. Just placed them gently and walked back to the barn. Tala watched for hours before crawling toward the items. She touched the boots like they were made of glass. Her grandmother had always warned her, take only what's offered from the heart. So she whispered a thank you in her native tongue, then slid the boots onto her feet. They didn't fit perfectly. One was tighter than the other. But they were warm. And one was enough. That night, Jacob stood on the porch and looked out toward the dark brush. He didn't expect to see her. But still, he raised a mug of coffee in the air and said, "Glad you took the boots." From behind a tree not far from the fence line, Tala listened. Her breath caught. She hadn't made a sound. He'd known anyway. She stepped back, ready to run. But then she stopped. The night air pressed in around her, crisp and still. She turned and did something she hadn't done in months. She smiled, just a little. The next morning, the cloth was folded neatly with a single stone on top, as if to say, "I was here. I took what you gave. I mean no harm." Jacob picked up the cloth, brushed the dust from the stone, and placed both on the edge of the porch. That afternoon, he left a canteen and a clean shirt. He didn't know how long she'd stay, or if she'd ever speak to him. But he didn't need answers. He only needed to offer what little peace he had. In the evenings, he started reading outside. Just loud enough for his voice to carry. Stories about rivers and stars. About the land. About people who lost things and found them again, slowly, quietly. Behind the rocks, Tala listened. Every night. Her heartbeat calmed to the rhythm of his words. It wasn't home. Not yet. But it was the closest she'd come in a long, long time. Dawn's first light painted the ranch in pale gold as Tala crept closer to the barn. Her boots, once foreign and stiff, now fit better, molding to her feet like a second skin. The chill in the air made her shoulders ache, but she remembered Jacob's care, bread for hunger, boots for cold, and unspoken trust. Each gift carried a spark of hope, a promise of something gentler than fear. Inside the barn, Jacob was brushing down a sorrel mare. He glanced at the open doorway and nodded, a silent welcome. Tala paused at the threshold, heart racing. She had never crossed the line before. Not during daylight. Not so boldly. He spoke first, voice low and calm. "Mornin', Tala." He used her name without hesitation. It surprised her how light it sounded, like music in dry air. "Thank you," she whispered, voice catching. She stood by the feeding trough, fingers trailing over the rough wood. Jacob set the brush aside and sat on an empty bale. "You don't have to hide," he said. "I've got plenty of room here." Outside, Buck nosed the door, curious. Tala stepped back, uncertain. Inside the barn smelled of hay and horses and safety, strange comfort. She hesitated, then moved forward until she was close enough to feel his warmth. "How did you learn my name?" she asked. Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a scrap of cloth with faded embroidery. Tala. Her handwriting. Her grandmother's gift, lost in the chase. He laid it gently on her lap. Found this by the fence, he said. Thought you might want it back. Tears blurred her vision. She clasped the cloth against her heart. My grandmother taught me wisdom, she said softly in Apache, and then in stilted English, she said names carry power. Jacob offered a small smile. Then yours is safe here. They sat in silence, two souls shaped by loss, one by exile, another by grief. Outside, the sky brightened, and a pair of red-tailed hawks soared overhead, circling in harmony. Tala watched them glide, feeling a flicker of joy she hadn't known in weeks. Jacob stood and shuffled toward the tack room. I'm heading out to check the north fence, he said. Can't have cattle wandering off. Stay here if you want. Her heart leaped. For the first time, she considered staying. Not hiding in shadows, but embracing this kindness. She nodded. As he mounted his horse, he called over his shoulder, I'll leave your breakfast in the manger. And water by the door. When the barn door creaked closed behind him, Tala let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She folded the embroidered cloth, whispering, Thank you. The word felt new in her mouth, rich as wealth, bright as morning, full of unexpected happiness. She knelt beside the mare, offering a gentle hand on its flank. In that moment, Tala realized she was safe enough to let wonder bloom again. And in the quiet barn, she found not just shelter, but the first stirrings of joy, and a seed of new wisdom, to guide her toward a life she never thought possible. The nights were colder now, but Tala no longer curled up behind rocks or under trees. She stayed near the barn, wrapped in the same old blanket Jacob had once left draped over the fence. It smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, like the inside of a quiet house, like peace. Each evening, Jacob lit a small fire outside, just past the porch, and sat by it with 2 tin cups in his hands. One for him. One for her. The first night she joined him, she didn't say a word. She just appeared, her figure barely visible in the flicker of firelight, and sat a few feet away, legs crossed, arms tucked into the blanket. Jacob didn't turn his head. He simply poured hot tea into both cups and slid one gently in her direction. Chamomile, he said. Grew it myself. Tala took the cup with both hands. The warmth surprised her. It had been too long since someone handed her something just to comfort her. After a while, Jacob spoke again. You know what I miss most? He asked. Laughter. Not the loud kind. The soft kind. The kind that sneaks up on you when no one's trying too hard. Tala glanced at him, unsure. Then, softly, almost shyly, she said, My grandmother used to say, joy is the medicine that doesn't run out. Jacob chuckled, nodding slowly. Smart woman. The fire crackled between them, and in that space, stories began to flow, not all at once, but in pieces. Jacob told her about his childhood in the Midwest, about the first horse he ever broke, about the winter he got stranded for 3 days with nothing but a can of beans and a harmonica. She listened quietly, her eyes softening with each tale. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. She told him about her grandmother's hands, how they used to grind corn at dawn while humming stories older than the land itself. She spoke of her brother who never came home, and the silence their absence left behind. Jacob didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He just nodded, poured more tea, and listened. By the 3rd night, she laughed. It was a small laugh, cracked at the edges, like something unused for too long, but it was real. It came after Jacob tried to mimic the way her grandmother hummed and got every note wrong. She covered her mouth in surprise, then let it out, a soft ripple in the still desert air. He smiled. There it is. Tala blinked, then looked down at her hands. Feels strange, to laugh. Strange's not bad, Jacob replied. Strange just means something's new. And in that moment, something was new, a bond formed not through force or pity, but through silence, stories, and shared firelight. They didn't need to explain what they'd lost. Somehow, they both knew. That night, Tala slept in the barn with the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders and the sound of distant laughter still warm in her chest. Jacob spent the morning repairing a section of broken fence along the southern ridge, but his mind kept drifting back to the barn. He wasn't worried Tala could handle herself, but something had shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was staying. That afternoon, he walked out with a toolbox and a few wooden boards. When she saw him approaching the barn, Tala stepped outside, boots dusty, hair tied back with a strip of faded cloth. She didn't run. She didn't hide. "What are you building?" she asked. He smiled. "Something for you." She followed him to the side of the barn where the old tack room had long been empty. He opened the door, revealing the start of something new, a small cot in the corner, a wooden shelf, and a wool rug spread out over the dirt floor. "You don't have to sleep in the hay anymore," he said. "Thought you might like a place with a door that closes." Tala's lips parted, but no words came at first. She stepped inside, running her hand along the frame of the doorway. It wasn't much. But to her, it was everything. She turned to him. "Why are you doing this?" Jacob shrugged. "Because no one did it for me when I needed it. And because it feels right." For a long moment, she stood in the small space, just breathing it in. Then, quietly, she said, "My people say shelter is sacred, not because it keeps you warm, but because someone had to choose to offer it." Jacob looked down at his boots. "Well, I'm choosing." That night, she moved her few belongings into the room, a folded cloth from her grandmother, a tin cup, and a smooth stone she had carried since the day she fled. She placed the stone on the shelf as if it anchored her to something deeper than fear. They ate supper outside, side by side on the porch steps. The sky turned a deep blue, stars stretching across it like old stories. Jacob handed her a bowl of beans and cornbread. She took it with both hands and gave a small nod. Not thanks with words, thanks with eyes. After they ate, she looked out toward the hills and asked, "Do you think they're still looking for me?" Jacob took a sip of his tea. "Maybe. Or maybe they gave up. Either way, you're not alone anymore." Tala didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Later, as the fire burned low and the night air grew sharp, Jacob handed her a small key. "Doesn't lock much," he said, "but it's yours." She held it in her palm like it was gold. In her world, safety had never come with keys, only silence and escape. But here, in this quiet corner of the desert, a rancher had built her a room, and given her something no one else ever had, permission to stay. And in that quiet, sacred shelter, Tala felt a part of herself return, a part that had once believed in kindness. The morning sun barely crested the hills when the sound of tires on gravel broke the ranch's stillness. Tala froze in the doorway of the barn, clutching the key Jacob had given her. Dust swirled as a dark pickup truck rolled past the front gate, slow and deliberate. Jacob stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. Buck barked once, then went quiet. Two men stepped out of the truck, local law enforcement by the look of their uniforms. One older, with tired eyes. The other young, stiff-backed, his hand hovering a little too close to his hip. A third figure exited the passenger side, a man in a tan hat with a clipboard and the kind of voice that didn't ask, it assumed. "Morning," the man said. "We've had reports of someone hiding out near your property." "Girl." "Young." "Possible trespasser." Jacob didn't flinch. "Haven't seen anyone," he said calmly, eyes steady. The younger deputy stepped forward. "Mind if we look around?" Jacob paused, then gave a tight nod. "I mind. But I won't stop you." From behind the barn wall, Tala listened, heart pounding against her ribs. Her breath came fast and shallow. Every instinct told her to run. But where? How far this time? She backed into the tack room, closing the door silently, then crouched in the corner behind the cot, pressing herself into the shadows. The key in her palm felt like it burned. Outside, boots crunched over gravel. The men circled the barn. One peeked inside the main stall, flashlight sweeping the shadows. Nothing. Jacob followed behind them slowly, hands at his sides. You won't find anyone out here. Only thing hiding is maybe a few old coyotes. The man with the clipboard sniffed. Funny thing about trespassers, they leave signs. People leave signs when they're hungry and scared, Jacob replied. That doesn't make them criminals. The men didn't stay long. They checked the barn, the chicken coop, and the back shed. Never opened the tack room door. Maybe they didn't think it mattered. Maybe they didn't want trouble from a man with a quiet gaze and a steady voice. When the truck finally rumbled away down the road, Tala didn't move. Not until she heard Jacob's knock, 2 soft raps, like the rhythm of calm. It's over, he said through the wood. You're safe. She opened the door slowly, eyes rimmed red, but her hands steady. They'll come back. Maybe, he said. But we'll be ready. Tala looked at him. Why did you lie for me? Jacob met her eyes. Because everyone deserves a place where someone chooses them over the law. Her throat tightened, and she nodded once. Then she turned back into the room and locked the door, not out of fear, but because now, it belonged to her. And for the first time since she had run, Tala didn't feel like she had to keep running. The first storm of winter came early that year. The sky turned a heavy gray before noon, and by dusk, cold rain was falling in sheets. Wind swept down from the hills, bending branches and rattling loose boards on the barn. The land, so quiet for months, now felt alive and urgent. Tala had grown used to the chill. The room Jacob built was small but held the warmth of stillness and safety. Still, that night, something felt off. Her head ached, and her breath came heavy. She tried to brush it off, fatigue, maybe, or the cold creeping into her bones. But by the time the rain turned to sleet, her hands shook when she tried to hold a cup of tea. Jacob knocked just after sundown. You all right in there? She didn't answer right away. He waited, then knocked again. Finally, her voice came, thin and strained. I'm fine. He heard the lie before the words even finished. Jacob opened the door slowly. Tala sat on the cot, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, face pale. Her lips were cracked, her skin clammy. He crouched beside her without a word, pressed a hand to her forehead. Too hot. You've got a fever, he said softly. She tried to wave him off, but her arm barely lifted. It's nothing. I'll be okay. No, you won't, not like this. She looked at him, panic rising. Please don't call anyone. I won't, he said. But you're not staying out here. He helped her to her feet, gently, as if she might break. Her legs trembled. Every step felt like wading through water. Inside the house, the fireplace glowed warm and steady. He led her to the couch and covered her with a thick quilt. She leaned back, eyes fluttering closed, whispering words in Apache he didn't understand but somehow felt. Jacob worked quietly, boiling water, crushing herbs from a jar, preparing soup the way his wife once had for him. He set the bowl in her hands and waited until she sipped. The hours passed slowly. She drifted in and out of sleep, and each time she woke, he was there. Sometimes reading softly, sometimes just sitting, staring into the fire like it held answers. In the quiet, Tala murmured, "Why do you care?" Jacob looked over. Because when my wife got sick, someone sat by her bed even when I couldn't. Because no one gets through hard things alone. Tears welled behind her eyes. I didn't know people like you existed. He smiled, not proudly but gently. Most days, I didn't either. By morning, the fever had broken. Tala sat up slowly, sipping tea. Her voice was clearer. Her hands steadier. She looked around the small room, bookshelves, quilts, photographs faded with time. It was the first time she'd truly seen the inside of his world. And for the first time, she didn't feel like an intruder. She felt invited. Jacob brought her a fresh bowl of broth and said, "You ever think about staying for good?" She didn't answer right away. But as she leaned back and let the warmth fill her chest, she whispered, "Maybe I already have." The days that followed moved slowly, like the rhythm of a song only the land could hear. Tala grew stronger. Her color returned. The shadows beneath her eyes faded. She started each morning wrapped in the quilt Jacob had placed over her, sipping tea by the window as the sky changed from gray to gold. She still spent time in the barn, her safe place, but now she walked freely between the house and the fields. She helped feed the horses. She raked the leaves that had gathered near the gate. And when Jacob worked on repairs, she stayed nearby, not watching, but participating. They didn't talk all the time. Often they just worked side by side, their movements quiet, easy. But something new began to grow between them, conversation that didn't come from fear, but from curiosity. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Tala pointed to the stars above. "That one," she said, lifting her chin, "is Nadli. My grandmother told me it watches over people who don't know where they belong." Jacob looked up, then at her. "Maybe it's been watching both of us." Tala smiled faintly. "Maybe." She began teaching him small things, how to tell which cactus would bloom first, how to use wild sage to clear the air in a room, how to listen for snakes in tall grass by the way birds stop singing. In return, Jacob taught her how to read. Every evening after dinner, he brought out a worn book and sat beside her, slowly sounding out the words. She struggled at first, embarrassed by her mistakes. But he never corrected her with frustration, only patience. "Try again," he'd say, tapping the word gently. "It's not a race." And so she read. Bit by bit. Line by line. Until one evening, she looked up from the page and whispered, "I never thought I'd understand this." Jacob poured more tea into her cup. "You're not just understanding. You're becoming." That sentence stayed with her. Later that night, she took a small pouch of cornmeal and sprinkled it at the base of the mesquite tree by the barn. It was an offering, not out of fear or survival, but out of gratitude. A way of saying, "I see this place. I honor it." Jacob watched from the porch. He didn't ask what it meant. He didn't need to. He just nodded, touched the brim of his hat, and whispered, "Welcome home." And though Tala didn't say anything, the quiet swell in her chest told her he was right. It wasn't the place alone. It was the learning, the laughter, the space to grow. The safety to teach and be taught. For the first time, wisdom wasn't something Tala had to carry alone. It lived now in conversations, in shared tasks, in the warmth between two people who had stopped running, from grief, from pain, from each other. Spring returned to the hills in quiet, subtle ways, fresh shoots pushing up through cracked soil, the cry of hawks overhead, and the smell of mesquite after rain. The land, once hard and unforgiving, now seemed softer, more forgiving. Or maybe it was just that Tala had changed. One morning, she rose before the sun. She walked past the barn, boots kicking up dust, and climbed the narrow path that led to the ridge. It was the place where she had once hidden, curled behind rocks, watching the ranch below with suspicion and fear. The place where she had almost given up. At the top, she paused. The view hadn't changed. The hills still rolled out like sleeping giants. The sky still stretched wide and endless. But Tala had changed. She wasn't a shadow anymore. She reached into the pouch she wore tied at her waist and pulled out a small circle of stones, each one smoothed by time, collected from the land over the last few months. Carefully, she arranged them in a ring on the ground, in the exact spot she'd first slept after fleeing everything she knew. Jacob had asked her once if she ever thought about staying for good. Now, as the light touched the stones and the wind carried the scent of cedar through the air, she whispered, "I'm not running anymore." Behind her, footsteps crunched. She didn't turn right away, she didn't need to. "You always come up here this early?" Jacob's voice was low and steady. "Only today," she said. "I needed to mark the place where I stopped being afraid." He sat beside her, his knees creaking. They looked out in silence. "I've lived on this land for decades," Jacob said, "but it never felt like a home until you showed up." Tala smiled, her fingers brushing the edge of the stone circle. You didn't chase me. You followed, with kindness. That's what made the difference. They sat there until the sun fully rose, spilling light across the hills. The warmth touched their faces, soft and golden, like a blessing earned, not given. Tala turned to him. There are other girls like me out there. Lost. Tired. Chased into the hills. Jacob nodded. And maybe one day, they'll find someone waiting, with a blanket, not a rope. She reached for his hand. Not to hold it, but to anchor herself to something real. And for the first time, Tala didn't feel like a girl running. She felt like a woman choosing. A life built from silence and small kindnesses. A story without rescue, but full of healing. A story that began in fear and ended in peace. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that gentle people still exist in a hard world, then make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who needs a little hope today. Because sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones we carry the longest.